Israel. High-stakes diplomacy today as world powers look for ways to calm the crisis in Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry meets with Russian and Ukrainian leaders in Paris, while NATO holds an emergency meeting in Brussels. All this in light of Russian President Vladimir Putin's takeover of the Crimean Peninsula and hints that he might move on eastern Ukraine as well. As George Thomas reports, there's been a sudden explosion of pro-Russian demonstrations across that part of the country.
We drove 6 hours from Kiev to the industrial heartland and Ukraine's second most populous city. Here, many ethnic Russians want nothing more than to see Moscow invade and take control of eastern Ukraine, as they did the Crimean Peninsula.
Only Russia's President Vladimir Putin can save us from the illegitimate government in Kiev.
For several hours Tuesday, riot police blocked all roads near Kharkiv's city hall, as pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian demonstrators continued their almost daily face-off. Russia's decision to order troops involved in military exercises near the Ukrainian border back to their base angered many people here.
I'm very upset. I wanted those troops to attack, and I would have been the first one to welcome Russian tanks to this square with flowers.
This past weekend, dozens were injured when pro-Russian demonstrators stormed City Hall, replacing European Union flags with Russian ones, and called for union with Moscow. By late Monday, police had regained control of the building, and the Ukrainian flag flew once again. But it isn't stopping protesters.
The majority of the folks who have gathered here, many of them are pro-Russian, have called on their supporters to continue to gather in front of City Hall every night at 6 p.m. until this crisis is resolved in their favor.
How is the church praying today for...
Denis Sinelnikov accuses Moscow of instigating the protests to create a reason for a broader invasion of Ukraine. Sinelnikov, a Christian, was filming at a pro-Russian demonstration when police arrested him. We met him shortly after his release.
There is a majority of ethnic Russians who want Moscow to invade, but the majority of these protesters are being sent from Russia to stir up problems.
In the last few days, 11 cities have witnessed sudden eruptions of pro-Russian demonstrations.
At the borderline, a united country.
Something of extreme concern to Ola and Lena.
I just don't like it that we have so much hostility in our city. Somebody for Russia, somebody for Ukraine. I just don't like it. I want people to live in peace. We don't want war with Russia. We're brothers. We need to get along with each other.
Kharkiv is only 20 miles from the Russian border. President Putin said Tuesday he hopes he won't have to use force in this part of eastern Ukraine, but left all military options open to protect ethnic Russians from violence. George Thomas, CBN News, Kharkiv, Ukraine.
And Dr. Paul Botticelli, Executive Vice President at Regent University, he also served in the George W. Bush administration, joins us now. So why should Americans care about what's happening between Ukraine and Russia right now?
I think unlike a lot of places in the world where we hope we can just ignore it, this is important because it's on the doorstep of Europe. Ukraine really is Europe, and this is the last barrier of countries, the ring of countries before Russia is actually touching NATO members. And that makes it very sensitive because now everybody in the east of Europe is very worried that they could be next.
Indeed, indeed. Now, the Obama administration seemingly has bent over backwards to reset U.S. relations with Russia. It pulled the missile shield out of Eastern Europe, gave Russia a role in negotiations with Syria, as well as Iran. Why don't we have more leverage now with President Putin?
Because all of that was a mistake to begin with, I think. Mr. Putin doesn't understand politics that way. It's zero sum. Somebody wins, somebody loses all the time. He doesn't understand cooperation, doesn't appreciate the international law, the international institutions that have existed since the end of World War II. And he understands force and the control of territory, and that's what he should have understood. President Obama should have understood from the beginning, I think.
In light of what you're saying there, some say that Putin is acting so boldly because the U.S. has shown weakness with Syria as well as Iran. Do you think that's the case?
I think that is true. You know, it's fine to say Mr. Putin's worldview is wrong. It shouldn't be that way. That's not the way enlightened humanity should act. I get that. You know, as an American, I get that. But he's not that way. He really is a power politics guy, and you have to meet him where he is. Otherwise, he'll run all over you.
So what can the U.S. do now to influence the situation?
I think immediately begin to pass certain kinds of sanctions, target members of the Russian regime who are living high off corruption, use the banks against them, immediately offer money. The EU offered $15 billion today. We've already offered $1 billion. shore up those things. And other things the president's done. The president has slowly gotten tougher over the last few days. I think he should be even tougher. And I think a little saber rattling would be in order. Some ships in the Black Sea, perhaps, some troop movements in some places.
What is the risk of a stronger Russia, a bigger Russia?
I think the risk to the United States is not direct. In other words, the risk is to European countries that were formerly in its orbit, are back in its orbit, and it puts sort of a damper on Europe and its trade and its support for the free world. That's the big problem for us, and that does cost in the end.
All right, indeed. Thank you so much for your insight, Dr. Paul Ponticelli. Appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you.